a couple of verses, like 3 verses in the Gita. Three verses in the Gita that I think are apropos. I'm pretty sure this is the most rain we've had in a year. Collectively speaking, I think probably there's been more rain in 2022 than in the last 24 or 36 hours. But in terms of a 24-hour block, a tight little snippet of time, I can't remember the last time it rained this much. It's been a year. And when you guys came out in the rain, thank you for that. It's nice. And we cooked, and deity worship's going on. Many places in the world, this would be a light day. This would be a good day. You got to wear a light jacket on a day like today, whereas in other places of the country, people are freezing to death. And there's cyclones and tornadoes, and people are under feet of snow, and it's a whole thing for most of the world in the northern hemisphere. We got it pretty light, but somehow your body adjusts to whatever the lightness is that you encounter. And then if you're used to 60 to 70 degree weather and it's 55, you start to feel really disturbed. And if you're used to 65 to 75 and it gets down to 59, then you become disturbed. It's the way the world works. If you get in a really tough climate, you toughen up. And if you're in a really mild climate like we are, you soften up. So today I think is, horrendous. It's like a deluge out there. Flood warnings and such. Anyway, I thought this verse was appropriate. Anat bhavanti bhutani. Grains, living beings exist because of grains. Anna means grains, but you could also take it to mean food. Living beings exist because of food. Bhavanti, they exist. Anat, from food, because of food. It's in the ablative. This whole section there, it's all in the ablative. From this, because of this. So living beings exist because of food. And then anna sambhava parjanyad, and food comes from rain. Of course, it's a super old idea. A lot of times when you look at old world ideas about the nature of our situation, they seem a little dated. Like the 4 humors of the body, or even earth, water, fire, air, and ether. These seem like real primitive ideas, alchemical ideas about the nature of the world. They seem pretty primitive compared to, chemistry or physics as competing theories for why this exists or what things are composed of. So like the milk of human kindness. So milk was one of the humors of the body, and it made people soft and compassionate. And so when in Macbeth, the king was being criticized for having too much of the milk of human kindness and therefore not being willing to commit murder, it was understood that he had a surplus of milk in his body. And because of that surplus of milk, he was overly compassionate, because there was this idea of the humors of the body. And so if you had too much bile or too much milk or too much this or too much that, then you would have a corresponding mental condition. Such an idea seems childish. Like almost on the level that you put leeches on your body to suck out the bad blood. Or I think it might have been Catherine Queen Catherine, is that from Russia? She used to bathe in milk to give herself soft skin. I don't imagine bathing in milk gives you soft skin. I think it probably is going to create acne, or does not seem like a good idea in terms of health of your skin. I think a loofah is probably a way better way to have healthy skin as opposed to bathing in milk. But you get these old world ideas, and a lot of them fall by the wayside. Here's a really old world idea. We are dependent on food. Is that accurate? Still accurate. Food is dependent on rain. Is that accurate? Still totally accurate. Still totally accurate. And of course, this gives away what I'm thinking of with the verse, with today, how it's apropos. We live in a world where we just go to the grocery store. Or even better, you order stuff on Amazon and it gets delivered in 2 hours. Or Instacart. And generally speaking, if you think about it, most of your homes are located within, what, a mile, if that, of a grocery store? And you can walk to a grocery store. And there's a grocery store, I don't know, an eighth of a mile from the temple, in each direction. And you go to that grocery store and you can get, for all intents and purposes, you can get like almost anything. I mean, you can get organic vegan ice cream and organic tofu and organic vegan cheese. I mean, it's crazy the stuff you can get at your local supermarket. But in some ways even more astounding is that you can go there to the fruits and vegetables section and you can get produce from all over the world. Most probably they have mangoes down there right now. Because somewhere in South America, it's mango season is June. It's a relatively short season, May, June, like that. So we're in the opposite of mango season here. But if you're south of the equator, then right now is July. And there'd still be mangoes. And then they grow mangoes there and then fly them here and time it so they ripen on the journey. That's just insane if you think about it. That the way the U.S. is set up, or the way civilized countries are set up, you can go to a grocery store and pretty much get fruits and vegetables from anywhere in the world at any time, almost 24 hours a day. And they're not even that expensive. It's far out. As such, we are largely divorced from the food cycle. Gas prices just went up. Are you guys aware of that? Gas prices for natural gas, not for gasoline, but natural gas, just tripled. Are you aware of this? You should have all gotten a message from your gas company apologizing and saying that gas rates have increased. But if you look up how much they've increased, they went up 3.5 times in a month. In other words, if gas was, $65 per therm, which is how they measure gas, natural gas, it's now $350 per therm in a 2-month period. And if you compare the end of December to the middle of January, it went from 100 to 350. If you go back to November, it went from 65 to 350, went up 5 times in a period of 2 months. And it's never been above 100 in the history of the world. And now it's 350, currently. None of you are aware of this? You've got your gas bill on auto pay and don't think about it? I look at this stuff. Also, the gas bill at my restaurant, the gas bill at the temple, these are big gas bills. So I got to notice your gas bill will be $1,200. And I was like, what? There must be a leak. I thought, oh my God, there must be a leak. And then I looked it up and I was like, there's no leak. Sometimes we see that. The price of gasoline goes up $5 or $6. We notice it when we go to our tank, fill up. Or if you're a little bit more, I don't know, informed, you might notice the price of gas going up, natural gas. But when we go to the grocery store, we just buy food and don't think about it. Don't think about where it came from. While you sleep, trucks blanket the United States of America. Did you know this? You go out on the 405 at 2 o'clock in the morning, it's just all trucks. And they come in the middle of the night, and then they're gone, and the whole country gets replenished every day. But you don't see it, because they do it while you're asleep. And these 18-wheelers, dozens and dozens that roll into Laguna Beach in the wee hours and just replenish the city. They fill up the gas stations that just miraculously always have gas. That's because tankers come in and they fill up the gas. I was in the Greek island of Folegandros this summer, and it's an island with no access. And so, there's no trains. It's just a little island. There's no airport. There's a heliport. You come in by boat. And I was wondering how they got gasoline. They have actual tankers roll in, and they have 18-wheelers on the tankers with gas that drive onto the island and then drive back on the tanker, and they sail to the next island. And while they're sailing, they fill up from the tanker itself with more gas. And the gas prices there aren't that bad because there's no real cost, because as opposed to here where you have to truck stuff all over. I mean, not here, but if you go in, let's say to Arizona or something like that, you got to really travel hundreds of miles to bring that gas to people. There, it just rolls right off the boat, and you see an oil tanker come up, and a little truck drives out and then drives back on, and they're off the next island. It's amazing how the world's set up. It's ingenious. You can Amazon stuff on that island, but it's just there's no next day Prime delivery because it has to come by boat. So it's your Prime delivery will be 3 or 4 days from that when the next boat comes in. We grow up in this country largely separated from the food cycle, and to a large extent from the water cycle. Even in a desert. I mean, we're not a desert, we're chaparral, we're semi-arid, semi-desert. But everybody's got green grass, and you never turn on your water and water doesn't come out. In lots of places in the world, when you turn on your water, water doesn't come out. Like in Delhi, I lived in Delhi. Everybody had a water tank on the top of their house, and then the water would get turned on one time a day for an hour, and then you would fill up that tank of water. In that 1 hour, you just run your water big, that whole hour, fill up your tank, then the water gets shut off, and then the water then feeds down into your house, apartment, whatever, for the rest of the day. And by the time the next day's rolling around, you got really low pressure because there's very low water in the tank, and therefore it's not coming out very strongly out of your you were born here, right? Yeah. Anybody who lived in India, especially rural, yeah, right? It happens. Some places there's water most of the time, maybe 12 hours or even 19, 20 hours. But some places it's an hour a day, hour and a half a day. You've experienced this, right? We just never think about it. We have a sense, we should be good for the environment, and we should grow native plants in our yard and not have a big fancy English lawn. We have this sensibility. Drive an electric car. But we're never bereft of any of the things we want. They're always just available at all times because we have this incredible infrastructure we've set up. But if it stops raining and we can't steal water from the Colorado River anymore, and things really start to dry up, people fight wars over water. People die over water. I read a story about a woman in Darfur. You guys know about Darfur? Central Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, heavy jihadist militant groups. I don't think Boko Haram is there, but that kind of level, super militant. And they got into this where they're going to a village and kill everybody and cut the arms off all the children so they could never fight when they grow up. This is really savage stuff. A lot of human trafficking, just bad stuff. Anyway, a woman, her entire village was killed, including her husband. She was forced to leave, and she had to walk to a refugee camp that was 100 miles away, and there was no water. She had her 2 kids with her. At some point in the journey, she couldn't carry the 2 kids anymore, so she had to leave one of them by the side of the road to die of dehydration, and she made it into the camp with just 1 kid. This was, 10 years ago. It wasn't 1,000 years ago or something like that. It was 10 years ago. So in a lot of places in the world, clean water is not guaranteed. People drink bad water because they need some water, and they get sick, and they grow up malnourished, stunted growth, because they're drinking bad water all the time. They have a whole host of diseases they suffer from for the rest of their life, because in those early years of their life, they were forced to drink bad water because they had no good water to drink. Some places have to truck in drinking water. Can't drink the local water. That happens. So the local water is so brackish or it's so contaminated, you can't even drink it. You can use it for irrigating, but you can't drink it. So we grow up in this country, and we largely, it's theoretical, the idea that we're dependent on rain. It's theoretical. We know it, and people talk about the ice cap isn't as good as it should be, or in the Colorado River's running dry. We see a picture of a reservoir, but when we go to turn on our tap, it always turns on. And the biggest hit you take is they just jack up the price on you and charge you a premium because you're not in your tier of water usage. And then they'll make you pay extra money because you went into that higher tier of water usage than what you were supposed to use. But the reality of the situation is the world today, as it has always been, as it always will be, is fully dependent on rain, and we don't control rain. And this is why rain was considered to be the primary blessing of God to the world. Because rain created the water cycle. The water cycle created food, and that's how you lived. That's why all the ancient civilizations, Egyptian civilization, on the bank of the Nile. If you go to Persia, the Tigris and the Euphrates River. If you look at Israel, the bank of the Jordan. You see, or you got the Amazon. All these civilizations grew up on the bank of these great rivers. The Hudson from New York. Potomac for Washington, D.C. Everything is, civilization grows along rivers. You got the Great Lakes for Chicago. We are dependent on water, therefore we're dependent on rivers, therefore we're dependent on the snowpack and gravity, therefore we're dependent on rain and the water cycle, which is almost miraculous. There's all this seawater out there that's totally brackish and salty and salinated. You can't even drink it. And then somehow or other there's this massive infrastructure that just evaporates the water off the ocean and distills it and cleans it so it's no longer salty. Then it's a trucking system where clouds carry huge amounts of water. So much water. And they carry it over land and then rain it down, and it freezes. And it comes down snow and then gathers on mountaintops and then melts over the summertime when we're close enough to the sun and creates rivers, goes back out and dumps back out into the ocean for that whole cycle to repeat itself again. Automatically, like magic. Way more amazing than the trucking system. Enough so that it could be an argument for design. That the world was too perfectly tuned and too perfectly created for there not to be a creator. So this old verse from the Gita that seems to be archaic, simplistic, and maybe doesn't even stick with you. It's as true today as it was previously. You're just not, you're allowed to be deluded because we pay money for other people to worry about this stuff on our behalf and manage the water supply and manage the food production. And if you're a farmer, you know this stuff. If you're a farmer and it doesn't rain, you know this stuff. If you live close to nature, you know this stuff. But if you live in the urban jungle, you don't know this stuff. It's a theoretical exercise. You can philosophically or intellectually grasp it by reading, but you don't feel it. Because you don't live it, because you can always go down the street and get a mango, even in January. Even in India 30 years ago, when I was living in India, you could buy on the streets of Mumbai mangoes in December. They do this cold storage thing where they would freeze them and then they would warm them up. Not warm them, but thaw them out. And they would have this wrinkled skin, and they weren't very good. But on the streets of Mumbai 30 years ago, 35 years ago, you could, even then, they had it figured out. You could buy mangoes in the wintertime. So this verse is profound. Annat bhavanti bhutani parjanyat anna sambhava. Living beings exist because of food. And food exists because of rain. That one's easy. The rest of them aren't quite as easy. Where does rain come from? We don't quite know. It's like global warming. Some places get more rain, some places get less. Sometimes it dries up. They say, oh, that's the result. Sometimes it rains more. They say, oh, that's the result. It's not like they've got it all worked out. They can't predict droughts. They can't predict when rain's going to come. They get surprised just like everybody else does. Weather prediction is so approximate, it's ridiculous. Open that door real quick. Yeah. Is it raining? At this moment, is there rain coming down? Not really, right? It's supposed to be heavy rain right now. Up until 5 o'clock. It was. I read. The last time I checked was 5 o'clock. It was heavy rain at 6, but it's not heavy rain. Yagyat bhavati parjanya. Rain comes from yagna. Yagna means sacrifice. Most obviously, in Sanskrit, yagna refers to the ritual offering of ghee and grains into a fire with mantra. And the logic is thus. The rain comes and falls indiscriminately, and grass grows. You cannot eat grass, but cows can. Cows eat grass and produce milk. Milk has this amazing protein to carbohydrate ratio, but it's also got lactose, that sugar in the milk. That carbohydrate is lactose, but human beings produce lactase into adulthood, which means they're capable of digesting milk. You can also remove the lactose altogether through fermentation, like with yogurt. But unlike all other mammals, human beings produce lactase into adulthood. You can drink milk. So the rain creates the grass creates food for the cows produce way too much milk than their calves can drink, and human beings can live off of that milk. And all indigenous cultures have some form of dairy. Even in China, fermented even in Africa, they'll all have some form of dairy. Whether it's camel milk or whatever it might be, they've all got some form of dairy. So then you take the essence of that milk, which itself is the essence of rain, and you distill it further and you turn it into cream, or you'll rather take the cream off of it. And then you churn that cream, it becomes butter. And then you clarify that butter and it becomes ghee. And that ghee becomes, through several steps of distillation, the essence of rain, which was a gift from above that you can't control. And you offer that ghee, representing the water, back into the fire, which represents the sun, another ridiculously important part of the water cycle and photosynthesis cycle and carbon dioxide, oxygen exchange cycle. It's all linked to the sun. You offer it into the fire, which represents the sun, and you offer it with mantra, which represents air, and air, of course, is the carbon dioxide, oxygen exchange directly. So you got these three critical things that we're dependent on. The oxygen, carbon dioxide exchange, the water cycle, and photosynthesis. And those things are encapsulated in the Vedic ritual, where a priest constructs a yajna-kund, a pit, builds a fire, and then into that fire offers ghee and grains, also representing the earth and rain, with mantra. And the fire is the sun, and the mantra is the air, and the ghee is the water, and that's a way of giving back to the Creator what was given to you that you can't create on your own. That's yajna, kind of, it's a specific definition, and it's immediately what the term conjures up in Sanskrit. More generally speaking, yajna refers to any selfless act of charity that you do to connect with a higher power. Therefore, giving charity would be a yajna. Chanting Hare Krishna would be a yajna. Sankirtan yajna. Deity worship would be a type of yajna. Doing arti, it would all be within this sort of larger definition of yajna, where you are giving something back. But most specifically, yajna refers to this Vedic fire sacrifice, where you were saying thanks and essentially grace by giving something back. And so the rain is dependent on giving something back. That means that we are not just takers, we're also givers, and we are part of a universe that we influence. My son the other day asked me to give him an argument for karma. How would you argue for someone for the existence of karma? And so I said, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. No problem, done. There's karma. He said, yeah, Dad, but that's like in physics. I'm talking about a more subtle, philosophical type of karma. Where, what you put out in the world is what you get back. I said, well, that's also easy to see. People who are cruel and sadistic, they end up becoming more miserable. They're more susceptible to disease. Happiness studies have shown people who are happy and forgiving and grateful and give something back end up being happier on any metric you can possibly come up with that you can test. And so if you put out this bad energy, then you're going to feel bad. And if you put out good energy, you're going to feel good. He said, no, Dad, I don't mean that. I mean, if you cheat somebody, you'll be cheated. I want that. I want you to argue for that. And I said, okay, what would you accept as evidence? You're asking me for proof, so let me know. I want to know what you would accept as evidence. Generally speaking, when people ask for proof, they skip this step, that the person who wants proof should tell the other party what they would accept as proof. If you say, I don't know, that's up to you, that's actually not true. So anytime anybody ever asks me for proof of anything, I say to them, what would you accept as proof? And at least 50 to 70% of the time, people have no idea what to say. Because when we talk about karma and this equal and opposite reaction, What you put out is what you get back. He accepted those, but that wasn't enough for him. He wanted me to prove that if you cheat somebody in this lifetime, in your next lifetime, then you'll get cheated. You follow? How do you prove that? It's interesting. You can adduce it. You can argue for the best possible explanation of the world in which we live, but adduction itself, I don't think is going to be enough for most people. First of all, the person would have to accept that you have more than one lifetime. Therefore, karma would depend on reincarnation as a precursor. So there's no need to argue for karma. You'd argue for reincarnation. And once you did that, they start having doubts, then you argue for karma. Of course, then you have to argue, how do we prove that reincarnation exists? If the nature of the thing you're describing, like for instance, how do I prove that I am conscious to you? Are you all conscious? The answer is yes. How do you know you're all conscious? Because you are experiencing it. How are you experiencing it? In the first person. How can you demonstrate consciousness except for in the first person? You can't. Therefore, how can you truly know that anybody is conscious? Because you can't experience them being conscious. You can simply see correlates of consciousness or symptoms of consciousness, but consciousness is not the symptoms, which could theoretically be a philosophical zombie or a sophisticated robot that behaved like an artificial intelligence but wasn't actually conscious. Proving consciousness means experiencing it in the first person, but you can only do that with yourself. Therefore, it is logically impossible to prove empirically somebody else is conscious. Nonetheless, we believe that consciousness in other people exists, which is pretty elegant proof that things exist which may not be able to be proven empirically, because the very nature of that thing is it defies an empirical definition, and therefore you have to look for some other things to define it. Do you believe in love as more than just a biochemical state? Some kind of, pair bonding with prolactin and vasopressin and oxytocin and serotonin, correlates in the brain. Do you believe in love? How would you prove that? Would the definition for love, would the proof of love look the same as the proof of, let's say, the temperature or how much rain was falling outside? No, it wouldn't. There are various types of things which exist in the world, and when you want to prove something that exists, then you have to argue for it, and you have to present evidence that would work for the kind of thing you're describing. So I think, what I told my son was, I said, I got two options for you. I can hit you with actions have an equal opposite reaction. Sometimes it's delayed, like if you smoke for a bunch of years and then get cancer or emphysema. It doesn't happen right away. It takes time. I can also provide evidence that if you live a life of taking and never giving, that you'll be miserable. That's demonstrable. They've done enough studies in positive psychology to demonstrate that. But if you want to talk about you steal from somebody and therefore when you get stolen from years later, it's as a direct result of that, how would you work that? What would the evidence for that one be? I can give you anecdotal evidence, I give you testimonial evidence, but you don't want that. You want hard evidence. So what would an experiment that would demonstrate that if you stole from somebody and there was karma and then you got stolen from years later, that those two events were correlated? What would that evidence look like? So that's number one. But then I got two explanations. So we're not just at an impasse where it's an unprovable hypothesis, which is no hypothesis at all because it can't be proven. But, it's not no hypothesis. There are certain things that are hypothetical, but they're worth considering, even though they can't actually be subjected to an actual experiment that will prove or disprove them. Ideally, you want to subject something to the principle of falsifiability and test it rigorously and either prove or disprove it. But there might be things that exist in life where they exist as compelling theories or the best explanation for a series of events. And there's other possible explanations, and you can't quite make it definitive, like in deductive logic, where it's either true or false. It becomes more an inferential argument, where it becomes a strong or weak argument for something. There are many things like this in life. Usually people demand the highest type of proof, but not everything that exists, that you accept exists, has that kind of proof for it. Some of it has inferential proof, adductive proof. It doesn't have the hardcore deductive proof. Things exist in the world. That's why we have different types of logic, to start to measure the different types of things that exist in the world. And so you got to match up what you want to talk about with the appropriate logic and series of proving and epistemology to therefore demonstrate the veracity or the truth probability of your claim. So I decided to hit it from another angle. I said to my son, "Are you conscious?" "Yes." Is your consciousness chemically derivable? No. Is it unique? Yes. Is it foundational? Yes. Does everything have a source? Yes. Would that singularity, that's the source of the universe, that's demonstrated by the fact the universe is moving out, therefore it was coming from a central point, would that singularity have to possess consciousness? If consciousness was a basic feature of reality and couldn't be constructed from other more basic things? Yes, it would have to be a quantum. It would have to be an individual, dissectable unit. Just like you can break water down into hydrogen and oxygen. You can break an oxygen molecule down into protons, neutrons, and electrons. You can break protons, neutrons, and electrons down into gluons and bosinos and neutrinos, subatomic particles. Can you break those down? No. Therefore, they're the basic building blocks of all reality. Or in a more simple way, this chemistry with the periodic chart of the elements. You don't break things down further from that, but you do. You break them into atoms and you break those into subatomic particles. But those would be two different levels of breaking the world down into discrete foundational units. So if consciousness is a discrete foundational unit, does the source of that consciousness have to also be conscious? Yes. What do you call a conscious source of all reality? God. Therefore, now there's a God. Now, if God exists, what will be the features of God? Now we have to argue for God being all-powerful. That's easy. It's the source of everything. All good, it's a little more of a tricky argument I don't want to make because I'm running out of time. But now if you get to an all-good and all-powerful God, wouldn't all-good God want to create the best of all possible worlds? The answer is yes. Would an all-powerful God be able to create the best of all possible worlds? The answer would be yes. So if there was an all-good and all-powerful God, and we just made an argument for one, we would live in the best of all possible worlds. Would the best of all possible worlds have the law of karma? And I would argue yes, it would. Do you see how I went a circuitous route? Just like I had to go through reincarnation to get to karma, and now I'm going the route of consciousness to deity, to all good, all powerful deity, to the best of all possible worlds. So the best of all possible worlds would include karma. Why would the best of all possible worlds include karma? Because if you never got a reaction for what you did, where would be the impetus to grow? But that cause-effect chain wouldn't always be so easy to spot. Why would it not always be so easy to spot? Because if it was too obvious, you would start to lose your free will. Would the best of all possible worlds include free will? Yes. Why? Because love depends on it. Would free will include the ability to turn away from truth and divinity? Yes, it would. Could the truth be so obvious to you that you can't possibly turn away from it? No, you couldn't, because that would mitigate free will. So God would have to remain hidden, but yet present. Present in an indirect form in the law of karma. That gives you your just desserts, but not so in your face that you start to lose your free will. Do we live in such a world? We do. If you want to find the deity, can you? Yes, you can. And that brings me to my second argument for my son, which was, listen, why don't we stop thinking about karma as an established fact the way the temperature outside is an established fact? Why don't we think about it as a compelling and interesting theory worthy of experimenting with? And why don't we look at things where there are actions and reactions. And we do see that what you put out is what you get back. And we do see that there's a reason to believe in an all-good, all-powerful creator, and karma would make sense of that. And why don't you then take karma as a compelling and interesting hypothesis or theory, and why don't you start working with it? And living in consonance with nature as part of a bigger organism, as part of something bigger than yourself. And why don't you see what the results of that is in your own life? And now instead of trying to say karma and you can't possibly get out of believing in it, now we're saying karma, a really interesting theory with some good bones to it, some good building blocks to it, something that's worth thinking about and considering and working into your life and seeing what happens. Do you guys follow this? This statement that yagyat bhavati parjanya, rain comes from yajna, really means that there is a law of karma in effect. And that you have to give back. And that's part of creating a situation. You give back. Like a friend of mine said, oh, it's raining here. He said, oh, you must be doing nice kirtan. Because kirtan gives rise to rain. So one sannyasi friend of mine I was talking to yesterday, I said, oh, it's raining, yeah. It's refuge, so rain, so auspicious. He said, you must be doing nice kirtan. And I said, yeah, okay. My closet atheist came out. But anyway, I want to make for you guys a solid argument for what's trying to be conveyed here. It's a compelling idea. It's a timeless idea. It's a perennial idea. It is not old. It is a new, beautiful, perennial, eternal idea that you are not just a taker in this world. Things aren't just happening by chance. You participate and you can give back. You can pay it forward. You can reciprocate. And you should. And yajna is this great way of acknowledging that photosynthesis and rain, the water cycle, and the oxygen-carbon dioxide exchange, that those things you should be grateful for and you should give back. Yajna karma samubhava. And yajna is born from, arises from duty. You do your duty, and then part of your duty is to give back. But the basic principle that I have a duty, most of the world is familistic. Most of the world believes that they are first and foremost a member of a family or tribe. Therefore, they marry someone who fits nicely within their family unit. They get a career which is supportive of their family unit. They take into account the feelings of their parents all throughout their life in the decisions they make. This could be contrasted to the individualism of the West, where you do what you want to do and you don't do things for other people, and it's almost considered to be sinful to live your life for other people, to live your life as part of something bigger than yourself, to live your life bound to something bigger than yourself, and to consider yourself secondarily an individual and primarily a member of a family. Yajna is born from karmas because if you have a sense of duty, if you have a sense of obligation, then one of those obligations become to give something back, ritually. Without a sense of duty, you'll just be a taker. Therefore, behind the act of yajna, giving something back in the Vedic sacrifice or through charity, behind that is a sense of duty. To care for your parents when they get old. To care for your children when they're young. To be faithful to your spouse. To be considerate of other people. To take the feelings of your community into account when making major life decisions. That I'm not alone. In the same way I'm not alone in this world, because I'm being given all this stuff, I'm also not alone right here, because I'm surrounded by people who made me, and who built me up, and who gave me all that I have, and I have a responsibility to them, and I'm going to give that back. And so a sense of duty precedes the evolution, or the, let's say, climax of duty, which is yajna. You following us? Karma. Brahmo bhavam vidhi. Know that karma comes from Scripture. How do you find out what your duty is? You have a document that you read, our sacred text. Or you have an oral tradition. Or you have the teachings of your parents. Or you have a constitution, which gives you big ideas. Or you have a big book that you read that teaches you things about the nature of the world. The codified teachings of your tradition. Even if that's the U.S. Constitution, which is how we determine things like murder and everything in this country derives from that Constitution. Your local ordinances can't contradict the state ordinances. Your state ordinances can't contradict the federal ordinances, and the federal law can't contradict the Constitution. Is there some rain? What is it? What's up there? A spider? Okay. I feel devalued that you're looking at the spider instead of listening to class, but I'll survive. And so this idea of a sacred text might seem archaic as well, but how do you put down and codify, for posterity's sake, the really powerful teachings of a community? You write it down in the document. How important is that to us? Our whole nation was founded on a piece of paper. As was communism and socialism, based on the work of Marx. Communist Manifesto. Documents are incredibly powerful. And so at some point you got to go back and you got to look back to your tradition, what they consider to be important. Then you get a sense of duty to them. Then that duty also includes yagna. Then that yagna creates rain. Then that rain creates grain. And then the grain gives you life. See the cycle? Brahmakshara samubhavam. And Brahma, scripture, is dependent on akshar. Akshara means the eternal, primordial, undecaying, transcendental God. It's a kind of a fancy name for God in Sanskrit. Tasmat sarvagatam. Tasmat sarvagatam Brahma nityam yagye pratishtitam. Therefore, the Lord is forever situated in the yagna. Because the yagna came from the gift of God, which was the scripture and the tradition. The tradition tells you about your duty. The duty tells you should do yagna. And that's a way you have of connecting in reciprocity with the gifts that you were given. And then the last verse. Evam pravartitam chakram. Thus this wheel, this cycle, was established. Nanu vartayatihayaha. And one who does not follow this or practice this in turn, agayu indriyarama. His life is just about enjoying his own senses. There's no sense of giving back. There's no higher power. There's no reciprocity. There's no duty. It's just a selfish life, a life in vain. Agayu means like a sinful life. Indriyarama, enjoying your senses. Sajivati mogam. And that person lives a useless life because they never learn how to give back and they don't continue that cycle. That cycle is given to you and it's in motion. People are doing their duty. They're giving back. You inherit that from your forefathers. You inherit that from your tribe. And then you give that back. And if you don't give that back, then you're just a taker. You're not a giver. And you break that cycle. And that cycle of Rita, that cycle of Dharma, that Dharma chakra is broken. So this is the final point I'll make is this. Number one is this is an old teaching. And that old teaching might make you think it's archaic and has little value, especially when we live in this world where we just go to the grocery store and don't think about it. But behind you living in illusion, there are people who are aware of the water cycle and food production, and they fight to make this happen. The only thing they can do to punish you is charge you more money for something. But the reality is they're dependent on water, and we're as much dependent on water as they ever were. We're dependent on food. Food's dependent on water. We have to live near bodies of water. We have to redirect bodies of water, make reservoirs, deal with the snowpack, freak out about it. And somebody who's smarter than you, who's more connected to nature than you, is worried about these things all the time. And so this verse, that we all depend on food. Yes. Food depends on rain. Yes. Rain comes from yajna. That's an interesting idea. And so how do we build that? We describe the law of karma. Just as my son asked me to argue for the law of karma. And when somebody asks me to give evidence for the law of karma, what's the first thing I ask them? What would you accept as evidence? And I segue into describing consciousness, which can only be experienced in the first person, but yet we all believe exists. And I springboard off of that to make the point to people that we believe in many things which are not deductively provable, but nonetheless exist, because not all things that exist are subject to that level of proof, but yet they still exist. And that's why we have adduction. That's why we have inferential logic. There's other types of logic. In fact, we live in a world where we believe in love or we believe in consciousness, which cannot be defined the same way, let's say, that the size of this table is defined. Then I build off of that. I say, hey, every action has an equal opposite reaction. All right, that's good. But give me something more. All right, well, if you do a bunch of cruel stuff, then you end up suffering a lot more. You create a hell for yourself. That's been proven by positive psychology. Yeah, but how do I prove if I cheat somebody, what happens to me 30 years from now is the direct result of that? What would that proof look like? I don't know. It seems it would be impossible to prove. It would be impossible to prove. All right, so it's an unprovable theory. Maybe. Let's go in a different direction. You're conscious. You can't find consciousness in the chemical world. Therefore, it's basic. The universe comes from a single point. That's proven by physics, astrophysics. And therefore, that single source would also possess consciousness. It would be all powerful. We argue for why it's all good. And now we think about what the world would look like with an all good, all powerful creator, which we've established. And that world would have karma, which teaches us some lessons, but not so in your face. You don't still have free will, which would have to be preserved. And then finally, hey, why don't you look at karma as what it is? A really interesting theory with some good bones behind it, worthy of experimenting with, and why don't you try it out? We know actions have an equal and opposite reaction. We know that what you put out is what you get back. And if we're wondering how far that goes, why don't you experiment with it? We got a few different ways we can look at the problem, but it certainly seems like it has enough interesting evidence to support the possibility of it that it warrants being called a hypothesis or even a theory. And now it's something you get to explore and experiment with. And yajna is based on having accepted this idea, because yajna is based on duty, and duty comes from a tradition, and that tradition ideally comes from divinity. And then by following the rules of that tradition and doing your duty, which includes giving back, you now connect to a higher power. And this verse is really laying out the essence of religion and how religion filters down into someone's life, not just on Sunday, not just when you drive to the temple, not just when you put a donation in the hundi, but the way you think about the air that you breathe, the way you think about the water you drink, the way you think about photosynthesis, the way you think about the water cycle, the way you think about rain. You start to live in a world where you see things to be grateful for every day. You live in a world where you're being blessed, where you're being looked after, where you're being taken care of, where you're standing on the shoulders of giants, where the Lord's holding you in the palm of his hand, and you start experimenting with giving something back. Not just being a taker. Instead of just assuming whatever's here, you just automatically get. And there was a TV show when I was a kid growing up where they would release someone in a grocery store for 1 or 2 minutes. They could grab as many groceries as they wanted, and then the person who got the most groceries or the most value would win. If have to figure out where to go to get the most valuable groceries. And that was the game. That was the game. I can't remember what it was called.
Supermarket Sweep.
Okay, there it is. All right. People get it. You walk into a supermarket, you realize this stuff doesn't belong to you. You walk down the street and there's a bunch of cars. You realize these cars have an owner. You figure that out. But sometimes, like in Supermarket Sweep, they would temporarily change the rules where the whole place was up for grabs. They would just tear stuff down. They were just treated the supermarket awfully. Poor people had to clean it up afterwards. But they would sweep it, sweep through it like a tornado. And so you can think about it, but we shouldn't just come into this world like somebody on the TV show Supermarket Sweep, where everything is up for grabs and we just take as much as we can possibly get. We should rather look at this world like you would look at a supermarket on any given day, or a parking lot full of cars. They all belong to somebody. Maybe one of them is mine, but they're not all mine, and I'm going to just take one I want. And I shouldn't be upset that some have windows on them and the doors are locked and my key only works in one car. We get it. There's like a system here. There's something going on. I'm a part of something. There's a series of rules. There's rules on the road. There's rules for the way the world works. And so if you look at the world and all the stuff you take for granted, water, food, sun, air, you look at all that stuff, you can change your lens and you can start to see it for what it is, which is a blessing, a gift which warrants giving something back. Anyway, it was raining today. I thought of this, wanted to share it with all of you. Let's do a little kirtan. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.